Hi everyone, welcome back into the classroom. We're going to continue on with another video here in the series of how to correct your roses. Okay, so we've done rose challenges. I've been showing you some other different types of roses and rose compositions, and we're not done yet. We're going to show some more. But I thought it would be great to show some of these correcting, to concentrate on correcting videos, because as you're posting some of your pictures, especially those who are posting it up in our Facebook group, we're noticing some common problems, and we're making these videos to help with those problems. So today what I want to do is talk about the petaling of the rose. So we talked about using too much white. That was the first one, and it was amazing how many of you said that was my problem. And now let's talk about the petaling of the rose. Okay, so when I go to petal rose, this is an ambergris rose. I love this rose. I painted it in several videos, and this is looking into it a little bit more here. So you can see why I constantly, everything that I do is constantly turning. So we're looking into the rose. And here's the thing, the smallest, the youngest of the petals are in closest to the center of the rose. And of course what happens to the rose, as it grows, the petals become larger, and then they start to open up, and just like you see here, they start to fall outwards here. And if you're dealing with a lot of roses, what happens is the petals out here become lighter because the pigment of the rose is really dark into here, and then as it gets sun bleached over time, and it loses its color, so it usually gets a lot lighter out here. Not all roses, but that generally happens. But look at the width of the petal here on an outside, what I call a reaching petal, to the width of a petal here on the inside. So to petal a rose really beautifully, what you have to do is start with smaller petal movements. They get a little bigger, then they get out here. As they get out into the bowl, they're really kind of a medium size. So look at the width here of this one here, right? And then look at the width of this one here. It's 30% larger here, or reaching petal than that. And you must keep that in mind as you're starting to petal. So what happens a lot of times with us as we get into petal, we start making some of these massive petals even into the bowl, or we'll have a bigger petal on the bowl and a smaller petal to the outside. That's not a rose. That doesn't happen that way. The largest petals always sit to the outside, okay? And many roses I don't even petal. Like I say in so many of the videos of the rose challenge, I paint for movement. I paint for petal movement. So we want to we want to concentrate on petal movement before we actually concentrate on painting the petals. Right? Let's paint one concentrating on petaling the rose, okay? We'll include that white thing too, since some of you had that little bit of an issue with white, like I did for many years. Okay, so here's my board. This is just a medium white background here. Right about a value 7 or 8. Somewhere right in between the two. It's actually right in between the two there. And I'll just put down some color here first. This is my standard palette of my 3 yellows: Hansa, Darulite, Yellow Oxide, my red, Naphtha Red Light, Burnt Sienna, Pine Green. This is my Cerulean Blue, Quinacridone Violet, Red Violet, and White. I'm just going to take some Burnt Sienna and Pine Green, some of my favorite 2 colors to start together whenever I use these like this onto a painting. It just, it sells really well for me. Look at how the colors just model out through there. It just looks great. I'll shift over to some Burnt Sienna. I love contemporary painting like this, the color movements like this. I think it's really nice. And sometimes I'll take just a little bit of that and some extender and soften it out. I'm not going to really create a painting here, but we'll just get kind of the ideas here. So you never know. Sometimes I just get going in it and I'll turn it into something. But I just got a little bit of soft movement back there. I kind of like it. I'm going to use, I use my 3/4 inch fusion brush. I'm going to use a number 8 fusion here. A little bit smaller than I normally do. I use an 8 or a 10. I'm going to do an 8 so you can see the petal strokes here a couple of times. Let's just make ourselves, since we used a Burnt Sienna in there, Burnt Sienna and the cerulean make a beautiful gray colors for a rose, especially for a white rose. So if you want it warmer, you head more over to a little bit of Burnt Sienna. We want to keep this up. Now we know, don't we, in our value scale, we don't want to go up here too much white. We want to keep it right in here, 8, 7, 6, 5, somewhere right around in there. That's where we want to keep it. Now this is a little bit wet here. Even though I use just water, it's thicker paint, so it's a little bit wet. So I'll be a little careful there. But it will mix up a bit, and that's okay. It just gives harmony to your flowers. I will start basically with the area of the rose that I want to have. And I always say in a rose, let's talk about petaling it. I always say in a rose, never make a rose bigger than your fist, because then you start to make bigger petals and bigger petals, bigger petals, and they start to get stiff because you have to stroke it so many times. So try to keep, and that comes from when I was a rose mulling painter. I still am a rose mulling painter. I was always taught years ago, 40 years ago, that your hand spins. Everything spins inside your hand, and your spinning can only go comfortably the size of your fist. So we keep everything there about the size of our fist. So that's going to be basically, and I'll soften the edges out here. That's what we like to do, soften out our edges. That's going to be the basic size of the rose that's going to be there. Now, like I say, and of course this isn't true for everything, but I like to take any kind of cooler color. Let's use a little quinacridone, maybe a little bit of the burnt sienna here. Will come in. When we're going to have our rose, I'm going to turn the rose. We go about a third of the way down here, and I set my darkest color. Now we know from the value scale 1, that's the darkest color that I'm going to be using right now. And here's the thing. As you're turning the petals, it stays real tight in here, because what you're simulating is the smaller little petals on the inside. And then as I come out, then I can make my movements a little bit larger. I'll lift the pressure on the brush and keep the movements a little larger. So we're here, it's a tight little turn. Here it's less, but still everything is painting in the round. Does that make sense? Now, I'll go find the bowl, because there's always a bowl. And here looking in, the bowl is right down in here. So I always go find that bowl, and we'll push that bowl on there like that. Push that color in, push it out a little bit. I don't need to go up all the way around, but somewhere right around in there. There's the bowl of the rose, okay? Now, how much contrast do you want? Do you want more contrast? If you want more contrast, we go down the scale, and we go from the quinacridone, which is right around here, to a 4, to the red violet, which is right around here, to a 2. And we can add that red violet into the corner. Real dark, cool color. Tight little turn. A few little marks coming out, but maybe that's about it. That's all it really needs in there. We don't go all the way to the top. That will flatten it out. But if you do go up, your strokes get a little bit, your movement gets a little bigger. Let's put a smaller little movement of the dark right down here at the bottom, where our shadow is going to be on this rose. Push some of that color in and out. And now we have the rose set up for the petal. So it's sitting here at right about a value. When you put this over here, I'm right about it. It looks kind of like a 7. It'll dry probably to a 6. Okay. Remember, it dries down about 1 value. So if it looks kind of like a 7, which is right about what that is, it'll dry 1 value down to about a 6, and that's a good place to start here on my white rose. Okay, so it's a good place for me to start. Now, let's petal. Do we want to warm up first? Yeah, sometimes I do. I like to. Sometimes I do. I don't always do it. Put a little yellow or something over here. I'll do that. I like other colors to go in. So here I am here. We're going to go up. We're going to go up the scale here. Let's just talk about value while we're doing this, since so many of you like to hear that as well. We'll go up to about an 8 or so here. We won't go any lighter than that. We don't need to go lighter than that. So I'm going from a 6 up to about an 8, and that's going to dry right to about an 8. It's a little darker than a 9, but it's a little lighter than 8. It'll dry right about an 8. I'm going to take that and I'm going to strike right across the front of my petal. Now, this is a petal. This is the top ridge of a petal that you see here. Like here's the arching of one right there. See? The arching of one. if it's closer inside here to the opening, it's going to be about that size. You can see it right there. As it gets further out, it's going to get bigger and then bigger and then bigger. So that one stays about there. We could drop another one here about right around in there. Now, how do you soften down? A lot of times I'll pull down, soften down. Sometimes I'll put halftones in there. You'll see in the videos I do it 100 different ways. And because I like to paint all different kinds of ways. I can take a little bit of this dark, make a little halftone a little darker down here, and just toss a little bit of that down here. What I've just painted though is the top line of the opening of the bowl, which is like a petal like that one right there. Okay, and do I need to go around? If you go around, you might see the edges of these others, and if you go down into here, they have to start getting smaller, and we can just push and add a few little petals there to, or little movements to the inside. I'll get a little darker, maybe a little bit of the violet color into that here, and my petals would get smaller and smaller, my movement smaller and smaller as I go into that rose. Little bit larger, little longer, larger as they come out of that rose. Does that make sense? And that's what keeps that rose here in good perspective as far as petals. So they and your movement. So sometimes I just paint the movement. I won't paint petals, but here I'll paint the petals so we can see what it is that we need to do. Now normally what I do after I do this is I jump out to here and start my reaching petals. So, and then I bring the petals in between. Now my eye shifts out to the reaching petals. I'm going to go a little lighter. We could keep it at an 8 to a 9, somewhere in there, but a little lighter. And what I'm going to be thinking of now is I have this width. I want to go at least 30% or so larger as I set this petal up to the outside. So I'll set 1, 2, how many strokes do you go across there? Whatever it takes, whatever size of brush you're using, to get it about 30% larger than that petal is right there. Then I can incorporate it. Do you do it with a halftone of your finger? It doesn't make a difference. There's a lot of videos on that. So I'll just push that in, okay? So now what I'm doing, what are you doing when you're seeing this? What I am seeing is I'm imagining, and this is why sometimes you'll see me in the videos take a little bit of my green and burnt sienna and put the stem on, okay? What's the stem do? Well, the stem is where everything attaches. So when I start to pull, so the main feeling of that petal has got to head to where that calyx is, where that stem is, and you can't see it because of the front of the rose. But if you could see it, there'd be a green calyx sitting right underneath there, and that is what's joining up. And that's what's holding the entire rose right there. So I kind of visually imagine that little calyx, and as I put on a petal, I kind of imagine this pulling to the calyx, because especially these outer petals, they're joined in to the calyx there. And so I'll start my width across. As I start my width across, I'm bringing this petal in towards that calyx. Sometimes they override each other a little, sometimes they don't. I'll put that in. It's got to be 30% bigger than this one is out here, okay? As I come around here to the back, well, you can see here in the back ones are still the same size. They're still the same size as these front ones over here. Now, if the rose was turned more to the flat like this, yes, you would see that. But if the rose is tilted down, where you're not seeing that, you're not going to see the big reaching petals on the back. You're going to see only these smaller ones. So that's why you see me sometimes, depending on the angle or the tilt of the rose, depending on the tilt, that's why you'll see me start to small down. So if I was taking 4 strokes, maybe I'm only going to take 3 strokes. I start to small down until these petals disappear back here, okay? Because the rose is tilting and you're seeing less and less of the big reaching petals. If if I paint big petals here all the way around to the back, then I better be looking inside the rose. My center is wrong. My center needs to drop down and turn and spin that way. Does that make sense? So, and these petals, again, I imagine them pulling. I stop at the bowl, but I imagine them pulling down and joining up into a calyx, which everything does on a rose. So as I come around to the front here, let's cool off a bit as we go over to our shadow side. We'll grab a little bit of our violets, a little more of our greens, tone a little bit here. We'll drop the value down just a bit, tone a bit. So here comes this one. I imagine there's right into the calyx, right into here. I pull this in till it gets right about that calyx there. And I'll push or pull in and out to set that petal in. As I come around to the other ones here, maybe a little grayer, a little bit more, I'm heading into the more of the shadow side, and sometimes I just pull out and I let these just die over here. But the impression is always got to be the larger petals out here. Does that make sense? The impression has got to be some larger petals. And do you do an edge out here? Most of the time I don't. Sometimes I do. So now I have the largest petal, the largest width petal on my rose, the medium size width, the small ones going up to the medium. Now as I petal the rest of the rose in between here, I try to hit sizes that are going to, I don't want to go this large. Does that make sense? Now if you go in and petal your rose with a bunch of petals that are small, 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 it's going to look like a mum. So whenever you have this feeling like my rose looks like a mum, well, you don't have very big petals. Does that make sense? And there's a lot of roses that look like mums, and that's okay. But there's a reason behind everything, and that is that you just have your petals too small. So you did not take a large enough petal to the outside. All I have to do here, I'm going to put a little warmth in, just a little bit of warmth into here. Because I like the green, but I don't like that much green. But I got to be careful not to go to too much white, right? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my light color, and this is where I head more towards my 9, almost my 10. Okay, so I get a little bit of my gray color into that here, and I'm going to strike the petal. Now I'm going to strike the petal with a longer stroke than I did here. That's what naturally happens into the rose. So here comes its little bit bigger stroke. That is a little bit too big for these guys here. So that's usually where I'll push it back and send it back a little bit, or blur off the sides and stuff here. So its impression is it's getting that big, but it's not quite that big yet. Does that make sense? And then as I come further forward here, if I put in any kind of angle, and again, it rounds down, but it's got to head towards that calyx. So we got to always keep this bowl. Always keep that bowl, that roundness of that bowl. If you lose that, you lose the shape of your rose. I can chisel in a petal here. I can pull another petal into here. Whatever I do, I pull right in towards that calyx there. I imagine the calyx. I imagine this coming around. And I try to go no bigger than that one right there. And I set that petal in, right in there. And so if I cross another one right here, it'll be a little bit smaller. It can be almost as big, but maybe a little smaller. We'll pull that in and out there. Drop that in. That pulls in. As we come around the other side, we need to darken just a bit, cool it off a bit, because this is the cooler side of our rose. We don't go as much, and this is many times over here, I just push a little color and do a little impression of the petal, what a petal might look like over there, because I don't always paint the petals over there, okay? And those two line up right there perfectly, and that's not a great thing, so I'll extend one a little longer here. Sometimes you don't see that till after you varnish. It's a bummer. But now we'll come into the very lightest. Now I've left the pure white for the inside of my rose in the lightest little areas. If I want to do another rose petal, maybe right around in here, just right in between those here. Sometimes I'll do that. and pull down, pull up or down to increase the light here of that. So I'll pull down there to increase the light there just a bit. And then I usually, if I'm putting on this much light here like this on this side of the rose, always make sure you have a bit of that shadow. If I start to put on that much light, then I'll turn around and I'll lighten up just a bit of these, pulling in a little bit more onto out to my outside petals here. Let's get a little bit of that soft yellow back in there. And that's kind of pretty. So I give just the impression of one right in here. That's all it really needs. And I take it off. Sometimes I take it off a bit. I want to preserve that shadow. I'm going to lift some of that off. Preserve that shadow there. Got a little bit of that light in there. Okay. But I will come back sometimes with that light right on the edge like this. And sometimes I might increase the size of this petal a little bit. And why am I doing that? Just to give a little more power to that outside one, or size. If I feel this one got a little big in comparison, I'll go grow these out here just a touch more. But a lot of times I'm adding an extra little bit of white to the petals, extra little bit of light or highlight to them, or changing their shapes slightly. But I like to carry that light over to this side, and I still have more pure white that I can use to develop some of this in there if I wanted to. And take another stroke here, a little bit lighter here, pulling down. Gives a nice shape. This one is a bit long and reaching. Do you see that? And so that's when you'll see me come back and redirect some of my shadows here. You know, we all make, as you're pedaling, you're always going to make a mistake or two as the pedal's pulling around. But then after I get that pedal on, I slow down inside and I look at it and I start to think, okay, biggest, medium size, smaller, smaller, smaller. That's what makes your rose pretty. And if you need to, take some shadow and just pull like this and take some of that rose petal size back down. Take some of the size down onto the bowl. Get them back into size. And if you just follow the shape of the bowl and the petals, that'll all look good over there. Then you can come back in, if you're working little bits here, come back in, work just the edge of your brush, put in some smaller, medium, little chiseled lines like I like to do. Sometimes I'll bring in a bigger, maybe a more of a front petal here. You'll see me petal all different kinds of ways. But it all depends on the size of the petals that I'm doing. Now, that one leaves kind of bad there. So, I mean, it's not real bad, but it is not flowing very well. So I need another one right over here. Just a little bit of one. And how do you know it's not flowing really well? You know, it's like my mother, who's a great artist, told me years and years and years ago. She says, learn to listen to hear. This is your greatest artist, your gut feeling. If you put something on there and something inside of you is saying, hey, that's a little wrong, it's probably wrong, okay? And then you just sit down, slow down, sit down, don't get frustrated. Just sit down, slow down, and figure out, what is it? Is it too much white? Is it not enough dark? Is it too warm, too cool? Is the petal itself too big for its position? Does it need to go down? It could be any one of those. But you just, like anything else, you start running through a little checklist of what it could potentially be, and you sit down and you correct it. Let's put just a bit more light up here at the top of this one. And I'm going to increase its size a bit here, because I can do that. I know that, and I can put, if I wanted to get more petals, I can put the idea of a couple of angles there, just little petal edges there. That looks pretty good. And so now you see how to petal your rose. If I wanted to close this rose up, let's just say I wanted to close this rose up a little bit more. Start taking this more towards a tea rose. I would close in just like this with a smaller little one right in there. Just curve in. And yes, you can do that. You can just start building petals in just like this. Just take the edge of your brush put one in, drag it off like that, and if you need to, restate any light that might be out here as a lighter little edge of a petal, and you can build and close up or do whatever you want and close up these edges here and stuff like that. There's all different kinds of ways, but pretty little ways. And if this was, you know, a rose that I was going to be real proud of, I would probably increase a little bit of yellow right in there. I love that. A yellow to the greens, burnt siennas and greens down here. I love a little bit of that into the rose, and then I'll soften that in with a little bit of soft white. I love those colors in there. I love the warm yellows to the violets, and when I paint those, everyone always likes those kinds of roses. But you can see here and what it would look like, maybe a little bit of that warmth up over here. You can touch into and fix it, everything. But start inside here small. Move a little bigger or a little bigger. Take what you're doing out here, make it again a little bigger, start to strike here. Take this one, add additional 30% at least, so an extra brush stroke. So if you made this in 3 brush strokes, you're doing 4 brush strokes or whatever out here to increase the size of that one out here. And if you need to, you can come back and stroke it a little bit larger later. And so as you come, so I put on that one and that one. That gives me a nice register now for the largest and medium size. And then I just start filling in and petals here to the inside that are going to sit. They can sit at angles. They can sit anywhere in here. I just start filling in my rows. You can make lots and lots of petals here, but you know the size to make them now so that they don't, they look like a nice flow. So it's the older petals to the outside, medium petals in the middle, smaller petals to the inside. That's what's very important. That's what goes through my mind. And you can always go back and readjust them, reshape them, do whatever you need to do here. Use some of the different techniques you'll learn in the 30 Days of Roses, the petaling edge technique that I show you, half tones. I'll just drop a little extra in like that, bring that petal up. Makes a nice little petal. There, drop this one down so it feels like the bowl there just a bit. Bring those in together and you got a different shape to a little rose there with lots of little petals on it. Okay, this one could have an extra. You could turn this thing right into a gigantic gob of petals if you want, but you don't. And a lot of times I don't paint that. You know, I used a lot of petaling like this on my main interest rose, but then on the others, I just push color around a little bit and give the impression of it. So there's that. But that's what I want you to do when you're concentrating on petaling a rose, okay? So concentrate on your light. You can see my whites are only right in here, see? The rest of these values are all going down the value scale to my darkest color that's in there. And if I wanted to be absolutely correct, I'd probably put just a little bit of that dark, restate just a little bit of that darker, some darker color right back out here. And see that carries out of the center. Right now it's a little isolated into the center, so I'll carry just a little bit of that out here to this outside here. And that makes that a little better. You could also, if your center is really dark, you can also take just a touch of the light value and just go over a little bit, take away some of the dark, and that makes your center a little softer there. Lots of different ways. There's lots of little things, okay? There's lots of little things to painting beautiful roses. But it's a technique, it's a look, okay? There's a lot of things you got to keep up here as you're painting. And as you're learning, you can't get all of that with your first couple of roses. You can't. You can't remember all of it. I used to write down checklists of what it was, check this, and that worked for a while too, but my roses became really stiff. And that's why I say paint 25, paint 30, paint 50, because it's causing you to start to look, and each, after about 7 roses, okay, now I understand the value, and then now another 7 roses to change some of your petal shapes a little bit, and understand the warm and cool, understand how a rose turns. It's a process. That's all it is. Don't get frustrated with it. It's a process. There's a lot there's a lot to painting a rose and making a beautiful rose, and you need to practice each of those stages. So here's petaling, and it's going to take some practice, right? Okay, I'll see you guys. We're going to correct some other things because I have other requests for fixing other things. So petaling, and then we'll go fix some other things. So we'll keep this correcting our roses, keep that going, because I think a lot of you are learning from that. All right? Okay, I'll see you on the next one.